What does Cormac McCarthy think the origin of evil is? Well, today we are going to look at a new quote from a recent New York Times article about McCarthy, where he talks about evil. And then we are going to link that quote with similar ideas that he explores in his unpublished screenplay, Whales and Men. And if you guys don't already know, my name is Ian, and on Right Conscious, we talk about everything related to Cormac McCarthy. I already have over 150 videos on McCarthy in the playlist down below if you are interested in taking a deep dive into my favorite author. And so, to set some context for the quotes, McCarthy, after attaining the MacArthur Fellowship and getting involved with the Santa Fe Institute, became friends with Roger Payne, who is a biologist and marine biologist who worked a lot with whales. And obviously, McCarthy is very interested in this topic because he wrote an entire screenplay about whales, like the weirdest screenplay you've probably ever read. And so him and Payne corresponded for years. And in 2020, which was only a couple years ago, Payne was writing a grant and asked McCarthy for some edits. And I'm going to talk about in a different video some of the editing advice that McCarthy gave to Payne. But in the grant, this is what Payne says is the reason we find ourselves in an environmental climate change crisis, if you believe in that. Quote, before its founding in 2020, Payne asked McCarthy for edits on the Project SETI's grant proposal. The reason humanity finds itself in the present crisis is because we have always put the needs of humans before the needs of the rest of life. Read the short call to action. It is our universal blindness, our fatal flaw. And McCarthy decides to respond to this and say, quote, it's also how we came to dominance, McCarthy shot back in a note Payne preserved. Roger, I think I just don't buy any of this. We are where we are because of symbolic language. Over, out, stop, period, end of story. His whale screenplay concluded, after all, with a string of deeply felt communions through human language, a poem, a letter, a speech in Parliament. And so McCarthy is 100% correct here, but it takes a kind of nuanced analysis to realize how language actually destroyed humanity, how it infected our being. So we're going to now go to the Whales and Men screenplay to get some information about or some further explication on McCarthy's idea surrounding this, and then I'm going to hop in, with what I feel like is one of my specialties in terms of kind of philosophical analysis. Yes, you see, what I was really after was why the world was going to be destroyed. I thought there had to be a reason. More and more language seemed to me to be an aberration by which we had come to lose the world. Everything that is named is set at one remove from itself. Nomenclature is the very soul of second-handedness. We endow things with names and then carry the names away with us. But the name is not the thing, and we experience nothing. We end up like tourists, having seen nothing in our travels but the ground glass mirror of a camera. We'd even come to confuse language with intelligence. Language is intelligence. Sorry for the typo there. It was the only definition we had. When I began to think the way I began to see the true extent of our alienation. Okay. What if there existed a dialogue among the life forms of this earth from which we had excluded ourselves so totally that we no longer even believed it to exist? Could it be that dialogue which we still sense in dreams, or in those rare moments of peace when the world seems in some sense to be revealed to us and to be proper and right? I knew that dreams were prelingual. I'd seen my dogs dream. And so language and the mind and self-consciousness is an interesting thing, because when we go back to the first person that ever who invented this, person zero or whatever happened, if you believe God, if God put it in someone's head, then how alien and weird must have that person been, especially if they started to work with language. And it was obviously a virus that is spread all across the world. But if we return to the quote from 2020, McCarthy talks about how it's symbolic language that's the root of evil in the world. And symbolic language has the ability to communicate meaning and create emotions and feelings that are directly not stated, that are found through analysis or through context clues or whatever. And this was a huge power, but the oral or verbal language necessarily wasn't the end of the world, because when we look at North America and South America that didn't have an alphabet, and if they did, very primitive alphabets, and a lot of other cultures, they were so far behind. North and South America didn't have an alphabet, didn't have the wheel. And if we took, and this is an abstraction in the sense that we equate progress in the Western world or standardize it in terms of our progress. So one could say, how long would it take either North or South American Indians or indigenous people to get to Kant's philosophy, to get to gunpowder, to get to creating big ships and inventing wheels and all this different stuff. I mean, maybe it never happens. Maybe, millions of years go by and they evolve in a totally different direction. And so that's something that we're going to talk about in a second, is that, it's kind of a false premise to look at, North and South American indigenous people and be like, oh, they're just ignorant. They never figured this out, or they were so far behind, because they were just evolving in a totally different direction, which maybe wasn't the right direction or the fastest or most potent for our definition of progress or success. Because the same could be said about other animals, wolves and whales, before, earlier in evolution, when we kind of branched off and headed toward where we're heading now, they were branching off for millions of years also. But their kind of journey and their push didn't lead to language and rationality, but maybe higher levels of communication and stuff that we're now able to understand when you look at plants and how they communicate with each other. Science has no grasp of it and maybe never will be able to grasp it. But without having an alphabet, language can only be so powerful. Yeah, when you look at the Mexica and the Mayas, they were killing, sacrificing 100,000 people a year and going crazy. And it's like, yeah, so language does eventually lead to separation and simulacra and these types of things. But when you look at the Western world and how many people we have killed, 250 million innocents alone in the 20th century, that takes an alphabet to do. And the reason the alphabet is so powerful and so pervasive is it's the greatest form of animism ever created, because 62% of you guys out there and 62% of Americans identify as Christians. And so Christianity is a hard break from animism, which states that all objects, even inanimate matter such as rocks, have a soul, and that you can have a reciprocal relationship with them. Not like you can talk to the rock and it says, hey, Johnny, how are you doing? But there are forms of inspiration and motivation and reciprocity that all pagan cultures had with all different types of plants and animals and many other things before they were forced out of that by Christians. And the reason that those pagan cultures and their animism was so strong in their belief in it was because they didn't have an alphabet yet. Because when you read a Cormac McCarthy novel or a scene, what happens? And so let's go back. So if I am walking and I'm a pagan person without language and I see a raven and it's flying a certain way, that could actually create meaning. And because I've been dealing in my family and my culture has had kind of a mythos surrounding the raven, and I've developed a relationship with it because I've been outside for so long and I'm open to that relationship, it could inspire me or even talk to me or like call me to do something. And the a priori of that relationship is me believing that it can do that. Most people don't believe that nature exists outside of some, go forest bathe, go have some fun, get out. They are not actively building a reciprocal relationship with it. But that raven can bring you visions. Like, you hear people all the time. They consume a certain plant, they do a certain thing. They're involved with nature in a certain way, and it brings them visions and teachings and these types of things. And then they start making stories about it. But the greatest psychedelic of all is the written word, because if you read a passage or a story and it's describing a table with a blue cloth on it, you're literally seeing it. You're literally in your head, unless you have, anaphasia, which is fake, or whatever it's called. You can visualize something as you're reading it. You hear the voice. When you read Judge Holden in Blood Meridian, is it Judge Holden talking? Or is it you talking? I mean, is it your voice, or is it some random dude who you've made Judge Holden talking? And if you guys love Judge Holden and Cormac McCarthy, I run a Cormac McCarthy book club and a Cormac McCarthy course over on the Right Conscious Substack. In the book club, we read 6 to 10 books at once. We have a writing group and multiple courses going, and I host daily office hours where you can come and ask me anything. So I would love to have you in the group if you are interested, and all the details for that are in the link in the description below. And let's get back to the video. You're literally hearing voices and seeing things as you're reading, and it's reciprocal because you're reading it, you're putting your eyes on the page, and it's affecting you back. And so the alphabet became the greatest form of animism, and still is, and wiped out everything else. But the problem with symbolic language and getting lost in the world of words is that it's the opposite of the natural world. It's just total simulacra, and you can get lost in that. I know a lot of people who get lost in that world, and that's why I've actually made a conscious push to really only focus on desert poetry and nature writing, because I want to be out in the field. I want to be out in the desert next to my house or in my backyard or wherever, writing poetry and kind of getting a 2-for-1 special. I don't want to be one of these lit bros or one of these weird people who become really insular because they are so inundated with the word. And McCarthy makes a great point here when he says, we'd even come to confuse language with intelligence. Language is intelligence. And we started to view language as this supremacy that we started to separate, as McCarthy says, from other things. We started to separate from dreams and all this symbolic nature of reality that was so present to us for millennia before. And that's why this channel is called Right Conscious, because you are creating an animistic experience for someone. And what are you going to do with that? Are you going to sit here and squander that? Are you going to waste someone's time and not work on your craft and not put out something good? Because you are the controller of the psychedelic trip. They will think, they will see, they will hear whatever you want them to. And if you have that type of power, if someone had that type of power over you, would you want them to be kind? Would you want them to be conscious? Would you want them to make it fun, make it interesting? I've read so many stories, not really from people on the bookshelf, but from beginning, intermediate writers. And I'm like, holy shit, I feel bad for your characters. They have to live this boring reality with passive verbs and adverbs and all this other shit. Like, damn, that sucks. And so what do you guys think? Do you think that Cormac McCarthy is right here? Do you think that his assessment about the origin of evil in the world is language? I would wholeheartedly agree. And I love that he's criticizing the guy who says, you know, human selfishness is the start of all the problems in the world. And it's like, no, man, like what comes before that? And like McCarthy was pretty aggressive. He said, period, and stop, which is funny to hear him kind of like getting into it with one of his friends. So anyway, thank you guys for being here, and I will see you in the next video.